Hey, good evening. I'm Councilman Greg DeWitt, and welcome to our first workshop on form-based code for the downtown area. Tonight we're looking at the different ways that we can look at buildings for zoning and uses in the downtown area, keeping it pedestrian friendly and making it enjoyable for everybody to come to downtown, because this is what we want. We want everybody to come to downtown, so we're trying to figure out a way that we can involve everybody. It's a public workshop on what we want to do down there for the form-based codes. After this meeting, if you have any questions or comments on what you've seen tonight, please contact the clerk's office here at City Hall, 949-6262, and they'll be more than happy to answer your question or direct you to someone who can answer your question.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Arlene Hunter. I'm the City Manager for Bonita Springs, and welcome to this evening's presentation. This is an introduction to form-based code, and it's the second of our series that we've been working on with DPZ code design. If you may recall, last spring we initiated into a contract with DPZ to provide us some additional visioning for our Bonita Beach Road, looking at the next step of taking the transportation to the next level of how that intersects with land uses. From there, we started focusing a little bit more on the intersection specifically of Bonita Beach Road and Old 41, and as Council continued their discussions, they looked at the possibility of what form-based code might look like on our Old 41 corridor, and how that might provide some more flexibility and understanding the intentional goals of the Council to provide mixed-use opportunities. So providing some of that information and background as we work through a process. Additionally, a second factor in what they'd be looking at is the City Council had asked them to look at our city-owned properties, specifically the Bamboo parcel and the Levin lot. Levin lot is right directly across the street from the band shell, just north of where the old site of Community Hall is. So we'd be looking at ideas of what the visioning of what that might look like in the future and getting feedback. So there'll be a very brief introduction of some preliminary ideas to that effect tonight as they continue to grab more public feedback in that process. Just a little bit on the process of how this will move forward. Tonight is the public workshop. We're looking for public feedback. You'll see that there are some conceptual ideas on this table. There's also post-it notes and pens that, on the conclusion, that you can provide some notes. If you have some specific questions about any particular parcels or getting some feedback or some direction from DPZ, at the conclusion of the presentation, DPZ will be here to answer questions. We also have community development staff here as well, if we can be of assistance as well. I do want to make a couple introductions. We do have Council Member Amy Carumba and Council Member Greg DeWitt, our Zoning Chair Larry Carolander, our Assistant City Manager is Matt Feeney right there as well. And so we're here to help anyway, but I did want to just reiterate that because of sunshine regulations, our City Council members and our Zoning Board member, they're just here to partake, listen to the public feedback. They're most likely going to reserve their comments for the actual City Council meetings where they'll be making informed decisions based on information they receive from you here tonight. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We do have a sign-in sheet at the front. We hope that you sign in the sign-in sheet. And we also have a comment card. If you wanted to provide any feedback on the comment card, you may do so. You may also provide written emails to our city clerk as well, or myself. Both of our addresses are on the website. Feel free to give us any email written comments. You can also call us here at City Hall and give us feedback as well. We will be collecting public comments through the whole process as we move forward and relaying those to DPZ. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Kalina, who will be introducing her team and going through a brief presentation on the introduction to form-based code.
Thank you, Arlene. Good evening. Welcome to our public meeting today. My team is right there, DPZ co-design with Javier Iglesias and Paul Genovese. Both of them were here with me and with a whole bunch of other people in April, and then we came again in June, I believe. So this is our third time as a team here to Bonita Springs. It felt like coming home, driving on Bonita Beach Road today, and here we go. We are here again. We also hosted one-day working session in our office in Miami with some of your staff, city staff, where we kind of started fleshing out some ideas about a form-based code. We have been here 3 times, but we still feel that we need to learn a lot. It's not that we can give you ideas and kind of decisions and proposals without including you all. So as Arlene said, today it's a meeting for feedback. Don't worry if some of these drawings look very kind of finalized or finished. You know, we sometimes don't like working in computers because a computer drawing seems like it is like a finished product. If some of you came to our charrette in April, you probably saw us that we were sketching and working on paper directly while many of you were present here and many of your ideas were directly included in our sketches. So this process, we like more interactive process with codes and code writing. This can be interactive but not necessarily on site. So all these workshops which we'll have with you, this one is one of them, will be for feedback for your ideas and your first impressions. This is an introduction to form-based code, so it's some of the things which I will say are more general. They are derived from our experience from many other places around the country. There are about more than 600 form-based codes adopted around the United States. A whole bunch are by our firm. Some of them are for large cities, like for example for Miami, which is I believe the largest form-based, the largest city which has adopted a form-based code. The good news is that in many of these places where such codes have been adopted, you can go and see the results and say, okay, these guys have had a form-based code for like almost 20 years. What are the results? And if you want to visit some of these places or like do a little research on the internet and see whether these form-based codes have had a positive economic impact, positive social impact, positive kind of community unification impact, if you want, revitalization and all of these things, you can go and check on the internet. We can give you such examples. I'm not showing a lot of those examples tonight, but we can assemble. Actually, this is something which we missed to do. Maybe we could have done a little appendix and show cities like West Palm Beach or like Naples or like Fort Myers, close by here, but also cities like Baton Rouge, like Providence. I mean, I'm forgetting all of the codes which we have written through the years, many years ago, so the results are today. I just remember one statistics, which I'm like, oh, I better not forget it to just mention it to Bonita Springs. It was in Baton Rouge, I believe. Yes, I'm forgetting even the city. That they had about, no, actually no, it's in Phoenix. In Phoenix, we just adopted a couple of years ago. We adopted a form-based code along their light rail, and they already have $600 million into investments into infill according to these new regulations. So what we would like to offer for you is a framework for which will encourage future development in your downtown. And this is something which such a need exists. We heard from all of you, and just like driving through your downtown, it's very obvious. You just invested a lot of money in an incredible infrastructure improvements, and it has been already a couple of years. So it seems to us that you need some kind of a push or incentive to make a development happen. And your city and your city staff, your leadership has made such efforts. Your current regulations have elements of this, incentivizing mixed use, incentivizing higher urban intensity, all of this activity which you want to see in a downtown. You have, you know, the new sidewalks, you have the parallel parking, you have all of these things, you know, wonderful streetscape, but you need now the vertical infrastructure, how to make basically the streets fill in with development. So a form-based code actually makes this process easier, faster, you know, kind of less painful and much more predictable. Much more predictable. So if somebody comes and build, you know, a building in a empty lot, he will know that the building next to him or the building across him, it's not going to be something which is very different from his own way of development. It's not going to be the old way of doing things, like you can put, you know, a big parking lot at the front and the building is set back or something like that. So it's like the predictability of this form-based code is one of the impacts or one of the conditions for incentivizing future development. On the other hand, also form-based codes are not strictly prescriptive, you know, saying, oh, you have to do exactly this use and exactly this building there. They're fairly flexible. There are things which are kind of, we call them parametric, you know, meaning that you don't need to prescribe a setback with a certain number for a whole street or a whole area. It's usually a parameters, or like a range of numbers or range of a quantitative parameters. Like, for example, the setback is, instead of only 5, it will be between 5 and 8 or 5 and 10. It depends on what you want to create. The tendency is that in more urban places, like along Old 41, which is basically your main street, you want to be more consistent. You want to have a very stable setback. You want to have the buildings basically arranged in the classic American traditional main street situation, where you have consistent pedestrian frontage, where you want people to walk and have an experience of going by shop fronts, enjoying restaurants or cafes or things like that. So in certain places we can be more strict with these requirements. In other places, where the more residential areas, there you can have a kind of a bigger flexibility. How do I change the slides? I'm forgetting. With this thing? Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so we have some of these, as Arlene said, you know, some of these thoughts have been organized on these larger sheets. And these are basically a selected number of those. There are many, many more, and more or less the contents goes through introduction of the main principles of a form-based code, which include the transect, a draft regulating plan, urban form, street hierarchy, architectural character, parking, signs, appendix. So with some of the conceptual site developments. Basically a form-based code gives you a mold or gives you a framework how you can arrange the different scales. You can start, you know, from the largest scale of the downtown all to the scale of an awning or like a storefront, you know, from the bigger picture of the urban fabric down to the details of the streetscape or each building. And it will be actually up to you as a community how much you want to calibrate and how prescriptive, how specific, and how precise you want to be. You have gone through many charrettes and kind of visioning exercises in the past. You already have existing regulations which touch upon the downtown redevelopment area. You have the old US 41 redevelopment overlay district, which is based on a on this town center concept plan, and you know, there are some really positive elements of kind of form-based thinking in these regulations already. You talk about parking, that it's nice to put it in the back, not to be visible at the front. You talk about building height setbacks, the step backs of buildings, so you don't have kind of the big, the tunnel, you know, looking streets. You have mandatory frontage on some streets and many other positive things. You have been focusing a lot on the public realm. As I said, you know, you have You have all the interventions, all the improvements of the infrastructure in the downtown. You have thought about your main square and the river and the Riverside Park. You have also thought about the Benville property as it's a city-owned property. Again, some images were created, some architectural renderings, illustrations. So you already have ideas as a community how you want to grow. And we heard at the last charrette that you want to keep the character of Bonita Springs as a smaller town with a charming, laid-back architectural feeling and experience. So this is something which we can carry on. We also have seen that there are some specific deficiencies in your current regulations. It's a kind of the lengthy process. You know, it's not streamlined. Everything has to go through a kind of a very convoluted way of approving things. You know, it goes from several months to a year or even more in some cases. And then what else? Well, we are saying here that some of the graphics in the code itself can be improved and made more user-friendly. This is a complaint which we hear all around the country, that the codes, the land use codes basically are not user-friendly, that you have different things spread around. It's not a kind of focused. Another thing is that a land use code, which is mainly your code today, is focused usually on the numbers. It is on these numerical or, as I said, you know, quantitative parameters, and not so much on the quality of things. You know, what kinds of buildings you're going to have, it becomes very subjective. You know, you have to have a public hearing to approve a building or all of that. You know, form-based code, if the community agrees on a vision, on a kind of an overall path for growth, then you can basically streamline your approval process to make it really faster, and you don't need to deal with small projects. You know, you can have a more tiered approach towards the process, where larger projects can go through a more detailed approval process, but the smaller ones, they can be as of right, as part of a form-based code. So that's kind of the bigger goal. As I said before, you can calibrate the way how you apply the form-based code to downtown. We usually compare it to a thermostat. You know, you can basically, and we call it a formostat. You can turn it up or down according to your desire. You can be more demanding or less demanding, and you can, and by shaping the physical environment, you know, you can achieve certain goals. You want to create a main street, and for example, here we are showing the beginning of that, which you are already have the beginning of this in your code. You know, the buildings are lining the street. There are elements of, let's say, an arcade or shading devices. The parking is in the back, and then you can even be more precise about the architecture. You know, about proportions, about what kinds of colors, what kinds of step backs. You know, you can be more articulate about the image which you want to achieve. We heard at the Bonita Beach charrette, Bonita Beach Road charrette, that you have a preference for kind of the old Florida style or the Florida cracker style architecture, which is a kind of pushing things all the way to the architectural syntax. You know, of course, you can have different styles, and if you want to be more prescriptive, we can create a form-based code which goes all the way to the architecture. But you also can stay a kind of clear of architectural prescriptions, and you can probably allow a more eclectic mix of different characters to happen, which are actually fairly typical for the American neighborhoods and many American towns, many American places. The thing is that the most memorable places usually have one predominant either type or architectural style, and you just remember, you know, that, oh, it's like Savannah, it's like the, you know, the townhouses of Savannah with the squares, or the side yard mansions in Charleston. So it's a kind of a predominant thing. So maybe here it's whether it will be the Key West steel look buildings, which are also, you know, typical of kind of the old Florida style, with the porches, with double, you know, with the gallery, the double, you know, galleries and stuff like this. Exactly, you know, with shading devices, like something like that. It's, you know, it will depend on you how you want, whether you want all of these elements to make it into the form-based code. I talked a little bit about the administering of the code. As I said, you know, the tiering of the process will be important, so you don't get you know, boggled with every single application. You know, let's say an infill of a small house on a lot, it cannot take the same time as a large project. You know, they have to be different things, and many of the projects can be approved as of right. We also recommend for the bigger, maybe for the larger project, like a special a design review board, you know, which will consist of probably, you know, people, residents with some specialty, whether in development or in with architectural education, or some people with some expertise. And then if you have the need for appeals, then you go to City Council as an appeal board. I mean, that's like just one way of doing things. But we can discuss other different approaches. It's the goal is to make the process simpler and easier, lighter and cheaper for everybody, for the city and for the people who will be making a private investment. The goal is that right now you have done a lot of public investment in your downtown. Now it's time to incentivize the private investment to come in and to basically create a great downtown. This is a method, you know, and I don't need to spend a lot of time here. We talked a little bit about it during the last charrette. A method which we use in in the forming of the form-based codes, in the creation of form-based codes, called the transect. It is a method of allocating the different elements of the urban environment along a continuum, along a section from the very rural to the most urban environments. So this means that we do not forbid anything. You know, if you want to have like, let's say, an office building, we don't say, oh, office building, we don't want an office building. No, you can put an office building in your downtown, let's say. You know, you don't put your an office building on the edge of the river or somewhere in the residential area. So you basically take certain elements and you allocate them to appropriate locations. You don't take let's say, a shop or a storefront and put it in the middle of your residential area. Things like that. Or if you want to have, for example, I mean, with probably an example with the tree location and tree treatment. Like if you want to have a more urban street, you plant the trees in tree grades, so the sidewalk is continuous and people can walk on top of the tree grade and the shade is basically provided by the tree. Then you go further in the residential area, then you have a more continuous planter because you don't need people to walk there, and you can plant larger trees in front of the houses and things like that. So the more urban and the more rural elements are allocated along this transect where they belong. This is a tool which makes it easy for planners and for your city staff to allocate these elements, and also makes it easier for the citizenry, for you all, and for developers and for builders and for investors to understand what the context of their property is and how their future development can fit with the rest of the community. It's the transitions, you know, in an ideal situation, the transitions between higher, a kind of higher intensity and urbanity towards lesser, these transitions, it's ideal to be gradual, but they're not necessarily, you know, gradual. In some cases, it's a little bit more contrasting, you know, and we usually give the most contrasting of all examples, which is like, for example, Central Park in New York. Central Park has the highest urban form, which is the T6, and T6 in this case is shown smaller, but in Manhattan will be much taller building, and it's next to nature, which is Central Park. It's a piece of nature in the middle of the city, so it's basically the transition is very abrupt. You know, so if you have a park, it's not necessary to go, a park or a large a kind of piece of natural area to go through all these transitional areas. You can have a large park, or like, let's say, the linear park along your river, Imperial River. You can go to something more intense, where you have restaurants and you have mixed use or stuff like that. So these are the transition with the transect. The transect actually is a methodology which is inherited from ecologists. Ecologists discovered these dependencies of and immersive environments between different species in the flora and fauna, where they have preferences of existence kind of in groups. Like, for example, and we made this comparison with the human preferences. Like, some people will prefer to be in more urban environments where they can live in the apartment above a shop. Some people will prefer predominantly more residential areas, but maybe with some townhouses, with some live-work units, with maybe a corner store, like here. And some people will prefer just large lots with a large yard, with large setbacks. We don't say no to human preferences. If they want to be in one of these environments, we can allocate them. But they have, they're like appropriate places. So in this case, because we are looking at your downtown, more or less your transect will be a kind of within this range. Of course, you're not going to have the most intensive one. I was talking about Manhattan, but this urban core, it's probably too much for your intensity. Your according to your current capacities and your current comp plan, you have the maximums is like 4 stories or something like that with certain mix of uses and all of that. So it's somewhere there. And then you go all the way down, feathering down to a pure residential area where you have houses and everything in between. So these are most likely your transect zones. We call these transect zones, and you will see here some sheets which explain these transect zones. We are proposing that we remap your downtown with the transect zones because they group multiple building types in these buckets, and they distribute the different human environments according to their character, from the most urban to the less urban, to the more rural character or more residential. And you have very clear, you actually have very clear main spine, which is the most urban along Old 41. Here with the new library coming along, the main civic square, and these are the intense, probably 4 blocks of highest intensity where kind of the most intense commercial use will happen. And then the rest is a kind of a mix, which is more urban general. And then you have areas of mostly residential on both sides, to the east and to the west, where we are saying maybe this will be a kind of the neighborhood transect zone. We also noticed in your current regulations and in your current code that you are trying to be very prescriptive according to use. We saw a place, one of the sites was like, oh, here, this will be a hotel, this will be apartments, this will be a house, this will be this will be that. That's why we think that the T-zones will give you more flexibility. You don't need to be so prescriptive. A hotel, a beautiful building can be a hotel, it can be an office building, it can be residential, and the look of the building should be as beautiful and supportive of your bigger goals as a community as anything else. It doesn't need to be said, oh, it will be a hotel, because the market for a hotel may not come in 10 years, so you're going to not have anything there. And if somebody wants to put a mixed-use building, you don't want, well, we don't have it, because it's particularly in our code is right that. So this T-zoning actually gives much more flexibility than your land use land use codes, and this is something which people don't understand, and they say something, oh, form-based code this is to put, jacket, and you're going to limit our creativity, and you're going to limit the flexibility. It's exactly the opposite. It's exactly the opposite, and you can, as I said, you can go and visit these places which I mentioned and see how actually development was absolutely incentivized because of this flexibility. You just know that the building has to be more or less at this line, where, it has to basically refer to the sidewalk in a certain way. It has to be this high. The parking has to be hidden. The main materials and proportions and things like this. In some places we regulate. In some places they basically don't regulate because there is already a tradition. Where it's a place where they build mainly in brick, they build mainly brick. In places where, like for example, Pensacola, we just wrote their code. It's a form-based code embedded in their current regulations, and they use a lot of brick, so they naturally tend towards brick in their main street. Here, you don't have brick that much, so you have other syntax. So we can tend to do it this way, or even if you don't do it, don't specify it, people will tend to, to follow the current situation. And these are the T-zones, the T3, which is the neighborhood zone, and then T4, the urban general, and then the urban, and then the most urban, which is your T5. We also have a Civic. Civic is a kind of not necessarily regulated, because Civic is for a special building, like it's your library. You don't want to make the library look like a mixed-use building on the main street. And you are lucky. It will look very different from what we see. It's a kind of big, imposing building. It's interesting building. So it can be something very, very different from the rest. Or it can be in style. It doesn't really matter. It's up to you. And then special districts, which in this case it's on the intersection of Old 41 and Bonita Beach Road. It's the northwest corner. Where you have maybe a kind of industrial buildings where we may think of preserving this funky character, making some kind of a more flex space for working arrangements, which are employment and maybe living or loft type of situation, live work, stuff like that. But that's just an idea that this can happen right there. Urban form, I think that I talked a lot about it, but the basic difference is if you look at this, this is the suburban form which has been allowed till very recently all through Bonita Springs, which is basically a building and then a big parking lot in the front. The idea is that you hide parking in the back and you create good streetscape at the front. That's a kind of the big general idea. The good news is that your downtown has wonderful urban bones. You have small blocks, it's very walkable. There are no buildings, so it's not very interesting to walk today because, there are many missing teeth. Basically, it's gaps, But if you imagine the buildings there, it's wonderful. It's a amazing, walkable urban fabric which other cities can be absolutely jealous of, because it's there. And you just have to build the vertical infrastructure to have a wonderful, walkable environment. Right now, you see there is nothing on both sides, or they're like buildings which are one story. And it's nothing to be said about the one story. You can have main streets of one story. It will be up to you to see whether you want to continue the trend of one story, whether you have market for 2-story, market for 3-story, for 4 stories, or whatever your threshold is, or whatever the market requires. So here we are showing an example. This is a greenfield project of ours. It's called Rosemary Beach on the Panhandle, the Gulf of Mexico Panhandle. It's a main street which consists of live-work units. It's 3-story live-work units with restaurants and cafes and little shops on the ground floor, and then 2 stories above of living. So it's a kind of a live-work situation. It's a very picturesque little street, but that's just like an example. You can have a smaller scale or larger scale, or they can be actually mixed. Doesn't need to be a totally continuous. And there is nothing bad about a single-story main street. There are plenty of great American streets which are no more than 2 stories. And it's exactly up to you. You know, here we, oh, sorry. I'm showing here, you know, the kind of the your Main Street, which is the most urban situation, where you can go from 4, 3, you know, 2, and 1. And they even can be in one block. Nobody says that it has to be continuous. If you want to be Paris, you know, Paris is very continuous. They have a special, you know, a second-story balcony. They have very strict dimensionalities of their vertical construction, you know, their cornice and everything. But if you want to be a traditional American street, you can leave a little bit of more variety in heights and in volume. And then you can see the other one, the T4, in 3 dimensions. Here we are just illustrating one building type, but there are other building types. In T4, it's not only townhouses. And already you have a townhouse designation in your downtown code. You know, they can be townhouses, they can be other duplexes, they can be small apartment buildings, they can be live-work units, they can be even single-family houses which are tighter, like which are, let's say, we call them side yard house with a 0 lot line on one side, and you have a small side yard. And they're really nice, nice building types. And then you can have T3, where we have bigger setbacks, larger houses, single-story or 2-story or whatever the houses are, on fairly, on slightly larger lots. You don't have like huge lots, some on the periphery, but not that big dependencies. The different frontage types, something which we pay attention to is how the building actually meets the street. And you know, buildings can have porches, usually in the T3 zones, stoops frontages where you have townhouses, and these are just examples from other places. A gallery frontage where you have a balcony above, and then you have a gallery for shade, you know, for shade purposes. You know, there are many examples even around here in this type of very thin and elegant galleries in Ybor City, in Tampa, you know, which is a kind of, and you all right away you imagine how it looks, or let's say New Orleans, you just have the image. In the case of Bonita Springs, you may have a double-story gallery. It may be you know, something of Key West character, you know, a kind of more wood, more siding looking. You know, this is actually a piece from Pensacola Code, which is with brick, where we talk about height and how to regulate height. To have some variety in mixed-use buildings, we regulate by stories. We don't say it will be 45 feet or 55 or whatever it is. We say 4 stories. And then you have slight variation. Some people prefer to put taller ceilings. You know, they're more generous to their, you know, future occupants. So they give really nice, and they really, units with you know, tall ceilings feel so much better. But if you you know, just set a number, and I think that right now you have a number, then you are a kind of more stuck with one dimension. Otherwise, you have a nice, pleasant modulation of the silhouette. For residential, usually stories, because it doesn't have such a big difference. In commercial, this allows also for very tall first floor, which for restaurants, for shops, is really good to have a nice height. So these are different tools in the toolbox of form-based coding, and you can pick and choose. We want to be more prescriptive. We want to be more strict in this, you know, in the heights, or in the setbacks, or in the architectural syntax. Street hierarchy. This is something which is also interesting, that, and we usually observe from existing places that it's impossible to create every single street and all the 4 sides of a block to be perfect. You know, in some places you have to have where, you know, where the cars go in, and where the parking lot is, or where your service areas is, or where the loading, you know, and all of that stuff. So we have to be realistic, and maybe assign, instead of be a hodgepodge and everybody to wonder, oh my God, where should I put it, where, you know, my driveway will happen. We may prescribe, you know, for example, we know that we want Old 41 to be an A street. of excellent frontage, and we call them a primary streets or A streets. And then there may be some others which are kind of left a little bit more free or more flexible in terms of driveways and approaches and all of that. And here now I'm forgetting all the streets, but with the red we assigned the A streets, and then there is a B network, and there are some which we even assign as a C street, which here it's the yellow is not even shown, but places where you will basically allow the servicing of buildings to happen. And this is something which we have to do together basically with you and your leadership or with staff to allocate where these streets are. Another thing is architecture character, and I think that I talked plenty about it. These are just examples of how to calibrate architecture, about fenestration, which is about the quantity and configuration of windows on a building facade. That's something very important. For example, on your primary streets, you need to have plenty of glass, which is transparent glass, on the ground level. You should not allow, reflective dark glass on the ground level of your primary retail streets or main street, because you see yourself, but it's not interesting. The business will go out of business, whatever the business is. This means that they just don't know what they're doing if they're putting reflective or dark glass there. So these are just elemental rules, but sometimes they're missing from a land use code, let's say. The percentage of glass on the ground floor, the percentage of glass above, all these things are elements of a form-based code which can be calibrated to create a certain character. And as I said, it's again parametric. It doesn't need a number. It doesn't need to be a number. It can be a minimum and a maximum, or just a minimum. Like for example here, here for example we are saying the above, the fenestration here, the glazing is 20% minimum. So you can go much more. You can have a lot of glazing, but this will open you to a glass building above. If it's 20 minimum without a maximum, this means that you can have really a lot of glass above. So if you want to cap it and say, okay, it will be 20% minimum, and then the maximum, let's say 75%, then you will know that you will still have a kind of a traditional looking fenestration, if you want it. If you're not, then you can leave it open. The form of roofs, the form of roof forms, and then what is this? Oh, the choice of materials, of course. The choice of materials is very important. It can be, again, a range. It doesn't need to be one thing or two things. It can be 10, or it can be 5. And actually, the less, the more you reduce your palette, the more balanced and harmonized look you can achieve. If you allow, let's say, 5 materials instead of 25. Because if you allow 25 materials, then it may become a hodgepodge. There are certain rules which you may consider, like, for example, heavier material to be closer to the ground and lighter material above. Sometimes in suburbia we look at buildings because today's methods are different from before. So, heavy materials above, you see like brick put on, above, and then stucco below, and things like this, like ridiculous situations which don't make a kind of logical sense. So this is a kind of one of the rules. Parking, we are talking about a few parking strategies. Many of them you already have as shared parking, where to put the parking, to have a kind of a central management strategy, meaning that parking doesn't necessarily need to be on-site. If you have a mixed-use project that you may use another parking lot. Right now you have a parking lot which is, I don't even know, what is this parking lot called? It's like a municipal parking lot?
Yes.
So it can be used for events and for, kind of overflow parking and things like that. So the shared parking strategies are extremely important in a place which will be walkable, and you want to incentivize walkability and adjacencies as much as possible. Establishing a parking management authority. In most of the successful redevelopment projects, they have started with parking strategy, and anchoring you know, a main street with a parking on one side and something on the other side, you know, it's like usually a win-win. But don't cluster everything in one place, you know. So you put parking and then you put something here, so people begin to, they walk. Otherwise, they just go to the parking, do their business, whatever they do, a movie theater or whatever it is, and then they go out and they never patronize, you know, the main street. So parking actually can be used as a very useful anchoring tool. Naples has done this quite successfully. And other things like that. On parking, here we are basically contemplating how many parking spots in each zone. The more urban you go, basically the less parking you will require, because the units tend to be smaller, and you know, if you have a family of 4, probably you will need your 2 parking spots for a house. But when you have an apartment, or you know, which vary from a studio to, let's say, 2 or 3 bedroom, then over there you can have reduced parking requirements, and you're using all of these parking strategies. So it's nothing new for you. Signs, these are very important. The current situation with the signs, I mean, we are talking about turning Bonita Beach Road, you know, into a grand gateway and parkway and this and that, but this is, you know, this is some of the signage which you have. And this is the Bonita Beach Road, it's not downtown. But also in downtown you have some infringement, because I think that you have to introduce a kind of more defined signage requirements. They're very, very important for shops to be able to survive. You know, like for example, urban signs, they can be smaller, they can be perpendicular to the building, and this is just one example. But we have experience with a kind of not requiring, suggesting, proposing, you know, signage strategies for the different urban areas. You know, and they're very different from something like Bonita Beach Road and the old 41, or a smaller side street where you may have a mixed use. So we were asked to do several conceptual site studies to see what it can happen within different urban environments. Like for example, this is the Bamboo property here, a city-owned property, and then there are a few other properties. I don't even know exactly what they were called, but like for example, this is site 1 in T3, and we just wanted to illustrate what an infill what kind of infill can happen in a very regular residential block. And here the innovation is the introduction of a piece of an alley. So basically, instead of providing the garage, the building front-loaded from the front of the building, to propose something which introduces a small alley where you can have a granny flat in the back, and the parking happens here, and you begin to shape a very different experience along the street. So that's just one proposal for infill. It is a small intervention, nothing out of this world. And then this is another one which is in a T3 and T4 zone. This is site 2, which is, well, it is site 2 is right there on, I don't know, I cannot even read. On Terry Street, is it Terry? Yep. Yes, on Terry Street on this side. And this one is actually showing, oh, I'm sorry, no, it's not Terry. It is, oh, West Terry, it's West Terry. Yes, it's West Terry Street, where, because the street is a kind of a more urban to some extent, or our larger street going east-west, we thought that small apartment, we call them apartment villas, can be introduced along Terry with parking in the back. These are building types which actually look like single-family housing. You know, they fit with single-family very well, and we have used this type in many places. This is actually the type which is part of a group which we call the missing middle. You know, we are very good at, you know, building, designing the big buildings and then single family, but we have forgotten this middle range of buildings, which are small apartment buildings, nice duplexes or fourplexes or sixplexes, townhouses. I mean, if you look at our towns, they have lost this kind of intermediate typologies. So this is a proposal. These types of apartment buildings from two of our projects. One is in North Carolina, another one is in Florida. So it's like people really like them a lot because they have a lot of light. You know, all these units have light on all sides. In this case, is a fourplex with something in the back, so it's even, you know, maybe an eightplex in some cases. And you can see here the full range, actually. This one shows a transect of these missing middle building types from townhouses and duplexes. These are side yard houses. These are duplexes on a common yard, on a common green. Another duplex, smaller houses. I mean, it's a kind of a full range of missing middle building types. And then this is site 3, which is the currently it's I believe it's a trailer park, and it is also an interesting study. This is Wilson and Shriver Avenue, if you know which portion we are talking about. It was a kind of an exploratory. We're not designing for the property owner. It's just an exercise of what can happen with a kind of a different thinking that in an area which is predominantly single family around. So we're thinking that we can create a cluster, basically a pocket neighborhood. You know, this is a kind of a fashionable term recently, a pocket neighborhood of duplexes around a common green. And these duplexes, they look like single family houses. So that's why the form-based code is fairly benevolent, because whether it's a single family house or it's a small apartment building or whether it's a duplex, they look very, very compatible. They don't, you know, scare each other. They're not a duplex like something different, oh, because it's you know, for different kind of people or whatever. They're simply for a different market. They're for younger people or for older folks. So this is the main green. This is the main green with some sitting here. The duplexes are around. You can see here, these are porches, and they can look something like that, a common green and porches around a Todd lot, a playing area, or the so-called pocket community. And then this is the bamboo site, a very preliminary exploratory drawing, which is in T5. So we wanted to actually cover the ranges of urban environments along the transect. So this one is, because it's on 41, it will be a primary, primary importance. We believe this is a very important, very strategic anchor, north anchor of your north-south main spine of your downtown. We believe that the Imperial River has the potential to be your mini river walk, your linear park, the place where will be your destination for visitors, for tourists, you know, will be your postcard for the future, you know, where everybody will know this is Bonita Springs. These are your initial ideas about the character. We know that this is not a literal drawing, and this plan is not literally showing this, neither this is literally what can happen. There are many, many different options. This is like a first sketch, but the idea is that maybe you provide a cluster of more parking, maybe a garage, maybe this is a surface, this is a garage. We thought that if you cluster more density there, residential and maybe some office, restaurants, maybe some shopping along 41 and the restaurants along the river, you know, this mix of uses can support each other. The restaurants will be supported by maybe by the offices, the residential will support the restaurants, also will become a destination point. The garage will also help more visitors and will even have some extra spaces to distribute for future development and mixed use in the rest of the downtown. So that's a kind of one preliminary idea. It can be calibrated up to higher density and intensity or down to lesser. It can be exchanged. Maybe the garage is here, the surface here, or both are garages or both are surface parking. There are many different options. So just when you look at it, don't say, oh my God, that's design, that's it, you know. That's just very preliminary thinking. This is exploring ideas like Riverwalk. This is in San Antonio. This is in San Luis Obispo in California. Of course, you're not going to have such a hard edge. In this case, we'll have a much deeper green setback, and then some restaurants and viewing areas, and a walking experience along the water, which can be shared by the whole community. Then we did some literal exploration studies of heights and intensity along Old 41. As you can see, we started with 1 story, then we went 2 stories, 2.5, 3 stories, a combination of 3, 2, all of these different things. The streetscape is in the middle, more or less currently what you have. So basically where and how you calibrate it, it will depend on you all and your leadership, of course. These are some synoptic surveys. We went, when we were here last time, we went through each of these areas, and we, what we did, we recorded some of the building types which you already have. There are certain frontage types with picket fences, with very nicely maintained yards, with nice relationship of the sidewalk with the sidewalk and your entries towards the houses, with the parking hidden and all of that. So we have a whole range of these, positive and negative. Some of them are, well, do you want this type of frontage to happen? So these are basically the choices which exist throughout your neighborhoods, through all these areas, and this is basically what we have done so far. Here on the table are many of these sheets, and many of these things which I just showed are here on the table, including some of our working drawings. These were big boards where we were taking notes, and we were drawing during our workshop in Miami with staff. So if you have questions, please. And also, you don't need to ask a question. You can just do a statement, feedback, opinion, whatever you would like to share with us.
I was remiss earlier. I just wanted to introduce Rex Sims, our LPA member, as well, and Mike Gibson, our council member, is right there as well. We want to leave enough time for everyone to provide some feedbacks on the examples that Galina's provided. So we're going to do brief microphone comments, but there is an opportunity to meet with all of us individually and talk individually with staff as well as Galina's team, so that we can record those comments. Again, please feel free to utilize the comment cards we have, or feel free to email us additional comments as well. So we'll take some brief comments now. We want to leave enough time for this process as well. Oh, the Post-its. Yes, we've got Post-its and pens to provide. Oh.
Arlene, what's the procedure going forward? What are the next things that you're...
Sure. So at this point, we're going to get we're getting feedback here at this workshop. Galina and her team are going to take that back. They're going to come forward with a little honing in those ideas a little bit more with their ideas, and bring a presentation back to City Council. And I believe we didn't say in October. We were looking in October, but we're going to finalize that. We'll publicize that as well when they're coming back.
How about the plan that you did originally when she was here the first time? You know, talking about alternative road access points to try to keep traffic on Beach Road.
Oh, this is separate.
I mean, is that part of this as well? Or?
So we have two projects going on at the same time, actually. We have the Bonita Beach Road visioning, and subsequent to that, the 041 corridor form-based code. So we have additional, they've done a preliminary introduction to some of their findings for the Bonita Beach Road study. They've put together some recommendations of what we talked about, short-term, mid-term, and long-range ideas and proposals. And so we're going to be bringing those back to council One of the things we'll be looking to do in November is to look at the city's long-term financial goals. We're going to be doing a budgetary retreat with council, and we're going to be identifying some of those potential projects that DPZ had suggested that we look at, and looking at our budget and seeing where that might fit into our budget proposals as we move forward.
I got a few questions. Number one, the setback situation. I heard you say that it'd be military grade going up and down the street, 041, everything's going to be in a line, right?
No, I didn't say that. I said that you may consider.
Okay. Okay, how would you consider the side streets like Goodwin and so on? Would you keep them, restricted on the 20-foot setback too?
Well, as I said, there will be the flexibility of a range of between, you know, I don't know, now you're telling me some streets, I have no idea which streets you're talking about.
Side streets.
The side streets, some of them, do you have like right now 20 feet?
I think that's a front setback, right?
Well, not in every, probably in the more urban area, in the more residential areas, you have 20 feet because it's a single family house and you have about 20 feet. And usually that's a good setback because if it's a front-loaded house where you don't have an alley, you know, you have your entrance and then you have your garage, and sometimes you need to basically leave your car in a driveway at the front. So basically you need at least 20 feet.
So you don't have a restrictive setback. Another question is parking. I've worked with you folks before on form-based code developments, and many times the developers get credit for the parking spaces along the front of their property. That's what we did in Naples. Is that going to happen here?
Credit for the parking to count towards your parking
Yes.
requirement? I think that in many places they do, in many places they don't. It depends on what you want to use this parking for. You know, you can maybe use it as visitor parking or overflow parking.
Right.
In the commercial street on retail, this is usually it's basically like teaser parking. It's like a couple of parking spots or which
Well,
is not
in
necessary.
downtown Naples, it was used by the developers against their commercial space that they needed. And the back spaces were used as for the building itself. But anyway, so you don't have that set in stone.
It's
in
not
this.
set in stone. It's either way. It can be ideally the parking spaces will be
and ideally,
for reducing the parking.
Do you
requirement.
suggest that the city sticks to the 20 units per acre density in downtown on 041? Is
The-
that your suggestion?
So the charge for DPZ at this point is that they are making recommendations for the form-based code based on the existing comprehensive plan. So the regulations that are within the comprehensive plan is where their recommendations will come forward through. As far as incentivizing parking and utilizing shared parking, those would be concepts and decisions that Galena would be providing different options to the city council so they can make a formulated decision on that in the future. So their charge here is to introduce the form-based code, provide alternatives, and provide examples of how it's worked in different communities, and then allow the council to continue to have public feedback and make that decision so it's unique to Bonita Springs.
And it also, one more thing, a form-based code can allow, you can have the framework and the vision, you know, and the T-zones and the regulating plan in place, and then you can be very flexible with your densities. You know, basically, the T-zones actually can graduate from one to the next. They can be successional. Like, for example, imagine 20 years from now, it's a different situation. And you need more density, you know, because your growth is amazing. Or who knows, you know, in 20 years we can only speculate. So the form-based code actually allows for this successional growth. So you can have a provision in your form-based code that the form-based code can be reviewed every 5 or 10 or 15 years, and you can upgrade, you can upzone if you wish to do so. So you can start with whatever density you have now, and you can think, you know, through later.
Tony and I were part of a project that just got an approval referred to as a Terry Street assemblage. When I look on your map, it looks like you have to me, it looks like you have a T3 zone that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like kind of cut in among, can I show you on the map where you're talking?
Well, this is a literal question which we can answer probably individually. Because, yeah.
Oh, no, so what I was going to suggest is we're going to have a breakout session. We're going to go through each of these sections individually, and that's where we would talk about specific property questions.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
Oh,
So, boy, he's got a lot of
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, it just looked like it cut in, like, instead of a straight line, it was like a cut in that didn't look like it made much sense.
These are lines which we have from.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
from
the other thing is, when we were doing our project, we and the city and everyone, thought that we were, like this development, but then we found out while we were doing it that the comprehensive plan actually was written to where it didn't allow it, even though the city thought it did, and their intention was to allow it. So we had to go through a pretty lengthy process to do a comp plan amendment. First of all, would this alleviate that? Or would this have the flexibility to do something like that if the city found out that, their code was written to where something that was not intended? Would this provide the flexibility to change that?
Well, right now we are dealing with another form-based, another code. It's not form-based necessarily in our own community. And we have exactly the same situation where comp plan and the current land use, they do not correspond ideally. There are certain discrepancies. This happens all the time. So it depends on the process, when you are going to update the comprehensive plan, or you adapt, basically your form-based code to the current comprehensive plan. So it depends on that.
so the recommendations that are coming forward in the charge that was given to DPZ is to look at the existing comprehensive plan and to see how these ideas might formulate with the current comp plan as it is in place.
We are not actually we are not charged to change your comprehensive plan yet.
I have two questions. One is piggybacking on this topic. Will there be an opportunity throughout this process, Arlene, with staff and council, to hear any input DPZ has, irrespective of our comp plan? That may be an opportunity or opportunities with respect to how they may otherwise plan this if it were an off-the-shelf concept that they were delivering to another jurisdiction.
What I would think is if, as they're going through the process and there was some suggestion that they felt they needed to provide to staff at that time, we would look at that and of course advise council that this is a situation that they're looking at. But I think from the initial conversations we've had, there was lots of opportunity to look at the density, and what we were looking at is how that fit into, especially when we were next to existing historical residential neighborhoods, and how that may be impactful, and some ideas. So we're going to continue a dialogue through the whole process. I'm sure if there was some outlier reason that they needed to present something forward, they would advise us of that, of their professional opinion.
Yeah, in general, we have had experience in places where communities become very ambitious very fast, and then, it becomes like a competition for a lot of intensity and a lot of development right away, and then nothing happens because they went a little bit too ambitious and too fast. So it's in probably the most successful places, they have taken it incrementally, and they have created an opportunity for more players, for more people to participate in this infilling and redevelopment and building process. These are the most successful places. Where they have decided to go for extremes, like, oh, let's allow 30 stories or something, then one big developer comes and he grabs everything which the market can handle, and then the rest of the community doesn't. It remains for many, many years basically empty. This we have seen in many, many downtowns, especially of the fabric, a very delicate fabric, because we have a delicate urban fabric here. you can have a fantastic environment with smaller building types. You know, you cannot, these, you can make big gestures and big, big intensity projects if you begin assembling many lots and putting garages and all of that, you know. But then you are going to lose some of this fabric, which is the uniqueness of your community. So it's a give and take, and that's a decision which the community has to make.
So I'm going to rephrase my second question because you answered half of it already. Was there any specific methodology, or could you speak with us a little bit about what your methodology was in determining where the boundary changes took place and why you set it to that extent? And I asked the question, you know, previously conceiving that there are a lot of outlying areas that are relative to the T3 and potentially even T2 and some extraneous areas that would operate as a vehicle to potentially preserve some of the more historic urban fabric of downtown Bonita. Maybe you could speak to that as part of the answer.
Well, that's actually a great question or a statement, and actually this is exactly when I totally forgot that when we were looking at the T3 zoning, it's because we wanted to preserve certain character. Like, for example, along Dorch Avenue, you know, this is where it's a kind of the boundary with the more residential areas. You know, on the west side, in the, you know, along Pennsylvania and these ones in north-south direction, I don't even know the streets, but basically everything which is west of the Depot Park, you know, in the northern area, you know, north of West Terry, we kept these areas as T3 or predominantly residential for this particular reason. The lines, you know, these are our first impressions. You know, we drove through the areas and we observed and we said, oh, this is probably nice to keep it as it is. We don't, you know, or in some areas we thought that it looks like there will be redevelopment. The lines are flexible to a very high extent. This is, as I said, this is a first draft. Also, another thing is that the T-zones usually are overlapping. You know, the T3 and T4, many of the building types, some of the single-family housing can happen in T4 as well, but as I said, it will be with a smaller setback, most likely, and maybe the lots can be smaller. So there is, it's not like a totally cut off situation. Do you have something, Javier?
No, that in some places we extended beyond the boundary.
For this reason, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we were, in some areas we noted during our drive around and our studying of the character of one side of the street that your boundary ended down the middle of a street, and yet what was across the street was maybe along a creek, and it made sense to include that in that T3, for example. I'm thinking of the area around Tennessee. So that's one instance where we kind of were using our eyes to help complete the downtown boundary area that went beyond your actual legal designation. I don't even know if that's legal or if it's notional, but.
And now I remember the, okay, let's go to your property. With the T3, I know why you're asking this question, because we put T3 open next to T5, you know, to T5 and to T4. And here, no, actually sorry. We have 3 types of T5, which are core, edge, no, two, T5 core and T5 edge. And then we put the T3. And this is because we were looking at the aerial, and we saw that it's a kind of a, seemed to us like a sensitive area with larger lots. I don't know whether there are houses right now or what. So we thought that from an environmental point of view, may be difficult to develop higher intensity. This was the thinking, right here. Yeah. It may or may not be. Okay. Yeah. Well.
Is there any other
All right.
broad general questions about the process or how we're moving along?
This is so specific. If this is the only mistake here, we will be celebrating. We saw that this is like a large lot, and to tell you the truth, we didn't maybe know what to do with it. So that's a good point. We can always fix
So I'm
it.
an older lady. I'm 60, so you know, if I live 20 years, I'm good to go. But I guess my thought process. I own Tropics Real Estate on Fifth Avenue in downtown Bonita, and to me, I think this whole area is all about the millennials and the people. Do we have a group of people that are in their 30s? Or
Which
whatever?
area is all about the millennials?
Huh?
Which area? The downtown?
We're talking about downtown, yeah. And because I think if we make smaller units with 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, make them affordable, those are the people that are going to like bring Bonita Springs forward. You know, because they're 30 years old now, and I remember when I thought I was 30, I thought I was over the hill. But, you know, now those are the people that are going to move forward. So there aren't very many people here that I see in their 30s and 40s. And so when I'm, except for Tony, but I'm just saying. But anyway, at the end of the day, I think if we had like a conversation group of people like that say, hey, you know, look at this, and what would I want, and what could I afford, and what can I do, and what do I want for a hip place? Because we have this opportunity, which is unbelievable after 2000, to take an old place and make it new because it never really moved forward to a certain level. We have a chance, unbelievable chance, to make an unbelievable community out of the blue, but we have to have not just people in their 50s and 60s and 70s making those decisions. So do you actually have like a group of young people that say, hey, this is why
I
I think
agree
it'd be cool?
100% with you. Well, I guess the whole community was invited, but they're not here. But
No, I
did
know,
you
I know.
why?
I just mean within your group, like, you know, just
Which
a focus
group?
group.
Is a millennial right here.
All right, we found one. There we go. Yeah, yeah.
Which group? You mean our
But you get what I'm saying? The
Yeah,
way for us to be hip is like I was watching a thing about Prince, and this girl who's a young reporter, which I was a TV reporter for years, and it was so funny because all these people are going like, and Prince was saying before he died, he was like, how do I move this Judith Hill or whatever her name is forward? And all the people are going, well, do TV commercials, do this, do that. And she goes, oh, do Spotify. And Prince goes, what's Spotify? He didn't know, you know. It's so weird. So I think maybe there's a group of people we need to also communicate with that will move us forward in a huger way, because we're looking toward the future.
Well, this is absolutely a great comment. When we were here for the Bonita Beach Road charrette, there were a few, and I commented, wow, such a young crowd, and there were like 2 young people. So these people were actually commuting, you know, they were living in Cape Coral, and they were commuting to work in Naples, I believe, you know, and they were like passing through Bonita Springs, and they were saying, we would love to come and live here, but we cannot afford anything, and there is almost, you know, it's like difficult and all of that. So for people like this will be the ideal place to live, definitely. That's why we're talking about the missing middle.
Create a group and just go to like some of the colleges said, hey, give us 2 people from your college, do this and this and this and this, and create our own group. Don't wait for them to show up, because they're not going to show up, because they don't know.
Yeah, probably they will not
And
show
I
up,
want you,
yeah.
once we create a little group and say, hey, give us 2 people from each of your colleges, your high schools, or whatever, and what's your ideas?
Well, I mean, that's a possibility. At the next whatever public workshop we have, definitely they should be present, because we
But we have
assume.
to actually go to the places and go, hey, pick out two representatives, you know, if we do that, they'll think they're part of the whole thing, but then I didn't even know about this until some papers wrote me, so, you know, I'm 60.
That's true.
One of the problems we have in the overlay district is we're not dealing with large development lots. We've got a whole lot of development that's going to be done on 100-foot frontage. And one of the issues that always comes up is you have to have a dumpster and an enclosure, and then a 20-ton garbage truck's got to get back to the dumpster somehow. At each one of these places, and there are no alleys, of course, anymore. Maybe we could strike the whole thing off and start over in the plating and have alleys in the middle of the block, but we don't. And the point of the whole thing is that we're going to have a whole lot of smaller buildings. Your big building layouts here on the streets are very nice, but in reality, there's...
Where did you see big
There's-
buildings?
Well, there's
There
a
are no-
series of buildings,
No,
but
we
they're
didn't do-
basically going to be, the blocks are 300 by 300 in the downtown area,
yeah,
and that's what
yeah.
we've got to work with. And the other thing that is never taken into consideration in the development stage, but always appears later on, and that's a simple thing like loading docks. We actually have a situation on Old 41 where the loading dock is in the middle of Old 41, and everybody accepts it. Well, someplace along the line, the skimmer leaked. And so if you're going to have a business downtown like we have, you have to have some way to get supplies in and get the finished merchandise out. And oftentimes that's overlooked in the planning. Thank you.
Yes, actually, I touched upon this, but was a kind of very brief. This problem about secondary streets can be resolved with assigning your primary frontage, as I said, Old 41, and you said, well, where is the loading area gonna? We have to basically block by block decide where this will happen, and which streets can be of lesser, pedestrian quality where this, servicing can happen. The alley situation, it doesn't probably necessarily mean that you need to replat all of your blocks to include alleys, but it's not impossible to introduce through easements and things like that, or like inter-block agreements
Shared use
or
agreements.
shared use where you can introduce alleys. So it's it's not going to be probably one big gesture where we do it for everybody at the same time and say, okay, you're going to have alleys from tomorrow, which is not going to happen, but it probably can be done in a much more incremental way.
A great model for this can be found in the French Quarter in New Orleans, where 300-foot by 300-foot blocks, you really don't have a bad street. So you have aggregated lots in the center of each block that have driveways that don't really create a continuous alley experience, but you have different sort of carriageway entrances at irregular intervals, so no one street has to carry the brunt of the service to access the restaurants and the loading docks. There are a few streets that are mostly serviced, but very few. It's St. Augustine also, yeah, it's the old Spanish platting of the 300 by 300 foot blocks. Had to be handled that way.
Could you just explain practically how this would work if you were looking along the visual, along the, let's say, the main street that you focused on, and if we had as a vision, we wanted to have different heights and some variety of the frontage and all that, how do you practically get that if, one, you have individual property owners that might want to develop, or if you have an accumulation of various, if it all is one owner, you probably have more say in it because you negotiate what they can put in there. But if they're individual, how do you get that so that one property owner says, well, I want to do a 4-story and I want to do a 2-story or I want to do a 3-story. So how do you do that?
Well, if you have a form-based code, then they will have to do whatever form you have negotiated as a community or whatever you want to see. As I said, if you say that the height has to be 3 stories for everybody, you can do it, and you say on the main street will be 3 stories, period. Or you can say it will be minimum 2 stories and maximum 4. So you will have buildings 2 stories, 3 stories, and 4 stories.
Well, you could say that, but what if everybody says they want to do the 4 stories? That's where I don't understand how that works.
Well, then everybody will do 4 stories.
All right, but what if that's not what you want?
Well, what I want, it doesn't matter. It's what you want
Well,
as
what
a
if
community.
we don't want that regularity? What
Okay,
if we want,
okay,
we
you
want-
want
we
more,
want-
yeah.
We want interest, and either in the architecture, I don't know how
Okay.
you get the interest without being prescriptive, because you said you don't, we're doing, one of the reasons we're doing this is so that it could make it easier for the developers, but I don't understand how you, if that goal was to be variety, how
Well,
do you get
first you have, if you say, okay, we want variety, Then what you need to do is to prescribe the number of floors, by number of floors, the height by number of floors, and not by height, by feet. You know, that's number one. Number two, if you want specific variety, like what makes sense, where it makes sense to be taller. In our view, maybe corners make sense to be taller, and you say you will have maximum only on corners. So you have the corner buildings, you have 4 stories, and everything in between can be between 3 and 2, minimum 2, maximum 3. That's just one idea, and then you will have 4, 3, maybe everybody will go 3, 4, 3, 3, 3, 4. Or maybe you have another, yeah, but this is very high-level articulation, which almost nobody does. The market naturally tends to have variation. And if you want, and if your market allows for 4 stories, why not? I mean, it's like 1 floor of residents who will be paying you taxes and will, so it will be 4. But if you allow only by number of floors, then you have the natural articulation, undulation of the silhouette, so it's not like this. Then what you can do is say, oh, 4, but why don't we allow small towers, let's say on the corners, which is a small footprint, maybe a little loft, so you'll have 4, but then something sticks out. Did this in Seaside, or again, yeah, with maybe a 5th floor. This is what I'm saying. Maybe, why not? Not, you know, you change the comp plan along the line. Or you go only 3 and then you allow the 4th as a tower. So you can calibrate. It can be super, very precise. But, it's when you have the possibility of the market to come in and fill your 4 stories, you have to be basically, see what happened in Naples. I know maybe you don't like Naples, the main street, but they filled every single possibility to fill it in, and that's why it's a great street, because they filled in. Because we didn't allow 10 stories, 1 person to build 10 stories, nothing for the rest. And they build it to the maximum. And then maybe that's not what you want. Maybe we can articulate a little more. Yes? There was somebody else who didn't speak so far. Oh, no.
I already did my talk about millennials, but that's okay. Yeah, so talk about highest and best use is what's going to happen, obviously, because whoever owns the buildings are going to maximize. Somebody's not going to go 2 stories, somebody else is going to go 4. They're going to go for it. That's whatever the potential is, that's where they're going to go, right? But I think if there's a way we could make it smaller, like going back to the conversation about the millennials, because the problem, like in Naples, even though I love Naples, and that's where I live and where I have my businesses, majority of my businesses, they're so expensive now that there's a need for that smaller, as I said, millennial thing. And I think we made it more Key Westy with the little front porches. And yeah, they're going to go 4 stories or however many feet. So believe me, they're going to fit in. Nobody's going to go 2 stories and the neighbor goes 4 stories because they own the property.
We're talking about Old 41. On Old 41,
Okay.
Why not? Then there will be whatever it is.
But people will always maximize its highest and best
sure.
use
I mean,
for whatever
sure.
the owners are going to do.
Yeah, but
So-
why aren't they maximizing now? You know?
Well, I know. But I'm just saying, just
but,
give,
I mean,
but just
why?
to give you an idea, on Fifth Avenue, I am in a 1-story, I'm in 2 of the 1-story buildings left. They're going to be gone like in 2 or 3 years. And so everybody's, Hoffman and all that, they're building up these big stories. So people are not going to go, I'm going to go 2 stories just for aesthetic purposes. They're going to go.
But there is a kind of there is a gradual growth. I mean, we did the master plan, we did the Naples, the Fifth Avenue South when? 1993.
With Dwayne,
It took how many years?
With Dwayne, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
but-
the same company. It's our company.
Okay.
So we did, it took 25 years.
But then he came back a year ago or 2 years ago and he said, oh my God, this is amazing. But then they didn't do the last parking garage because of that. So I mean, it's going to be highest and best use at the end of the day. But I think if, as opposed to Naples, which is Mediterranean, if we could make this whole area be more Key Westy, like say front
Yeah,
porches
this is
and all that.
exactly what we do. We are
But not
talking
like
about.
Seaside, because Seaside is so
We're talking
boring.
about Key West. Did I mention Key West?
Right, no, you did.
I did.
But I'm just saying Seaside, you're talking about Seaside. It's pretty, but it's all the same. So it's kind of cool.
So at this point, I think we want to have opportunity for the breakout session, and any individual questions about any particular property we're here to assist with. We have sticky notes and pens, so if there's any comments you want to provide on the boards, as well as the comment cards we have, and please make sure that you do sign in the sign-in sheet.
DC office is actually